internship at the International Crane Foundation, and the rest is history.
I never look back.
After she finished her degree, she came and accepted a full-time job at the Crane Foundation. She has been doing for many years a long-term study of the sandhill cranes that live near Baraboo, Wisconsin, and their ecology, understanding their ecology. And that work has informed the knowledge that we have needed to reintroduce the whooping cranes to our area. So in 2009, Anne joined our whooping crane reintroduction program. And so I am thrilled and excited to open the floor to Anne. Thank you, Anne.
Oh, thank you so much. Bobbi, you have always been such a staunch supporter of our sandhill work, and I appreciate that, because whooping cranes are really, really hard to compete with, but there's still sandhills out there, everybody. So I don't know how to do this in the right order. I'm going to share my screen. Hope that I get the right one. There we go. I hope that you can see that lovely, lovely view of, that's Horicon National Wildlife Refuge, which is one of our release sites for whooping cranes. So speaking of sandhills, I'm hoping that we'll speak a little bit about them. But I hope that you guys, being from the Chicagoland area, have been able to see the sandhills migrating through twice a year. And if you're lucky, you can find a white one in some of those flocks. So today, what I'll talk about is only threatened, and I'll give you an update on our whooping crane reintroduction here in the Eastern Flyway. And only threatened, I thought that was kind of an interesting thought, that, you know, it'd be wonderful to not have another endangered species, that they're only threatened. How nice that would be. We can dream. So again, we have 2 species of crane in North America, of 15 total. And again, North America, and the only place in the world where you can see all 15 species in one place is the International Crane Foundation up here in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And with that, I will give you a reminder to check that chat box every now and again. If I mention something that has more information associated with it, Brittany will put that in the chat box so you guys will be able to find that. So those 2 crane species that we have, Grus canadensis happens to be the most common crane species in the world. And juxtapose that with Grus americana, it happens to be the most rare of all of the crane species. And there are some people in Wisconsin that would tell you, what, I see them all the time, how can they be rare? And we'd like to make that a more common opportunity for all folks. So here we are, and this happens to be a bird at the International Crane Foundation, but this is our ultimate goal, is to get more of those little guys out on the landscape, and that's our ultimate goal, and we'll get to how we can make that happen as we go through the talk. So a little history to begin with, and where the whooping cranes are. They occur in several flyways now, but I'm going to try to use my mouse here. So this is the original flyway of the whooping crane, and in the early 1900s, you know, they were only seen at Aransas National Wildlife Refuge. There was a few non-migratory birds down here in coastal Louisiana, but every year down here in Texas, there were less and less showing up. So they didn't know where they were coming from. We had no idea where the breeding area of those whooping cranes was. They would disappear in the spring and they would come back in the fall. And they had no idea where those breeding areas were. So that went on into the 1950s, that every year gradually that the population was slowly increasing. But it wasn't until 1952, when they were doing a survey looking for wildfires, that they saw white birds nesting up in Wood Buffalo National Park. So it was a long time before they found out where that nesting area was. And so they had a protected area in their breeding grounds, and they had a protected area in their wintering grounds, but they had a long flyway in between. So once the numbers started going up, what they thought was, well, they only usually show up with 1 young down in Aransas for the winter. And we know that they lay 2 eggs. And after some very specific research looking into egg collection, it was determined that they would not harm the population growth if they went to each nest, verified that they left a fertile egg in the nest and took one, and from that, the captive populations were established. Once the captive populations are established, then we can start to work on other populations. And so that is what is represented here, the breeding area in Wisconsin, and migrating to areas south, not all the way to Florida necessarily, but anywhere in the south where there's appropriate wintering areas. That was another migratory population that they wanted to establish. There's also currently reintroduction in coastal Louisiana, back in there where there was historically non-migratory birds. There's another reintroduction there. That started in 2011. And I forgot to mention that this migratory population was established in 2001 and is still ongoing. And there are still a few birds left down here in the Kissimmee Prairie in central Florida. There was in the mid 1990s, there was an attempt to establish another non-migratory population in Florida. And I will talk about some of those and other ones in a little bit. But currently we have those 3 active populations of whooping cranes. So why do we want to separate them out? Why do we want to have extra migratory pathways or populations? And I will back up a few steps and talk more about the endangered species list and use that to explain why we are doing this. So the whooping crane had the dubious distinction of being on the first class, the class of 67, the very first endangered species list. So 5 months out from the creation of the Endangered Species Act, the long list of birds on that, there was 36, a lot of them from the Hawaii or the Pacific Islands, understandably. And right now, some of those still have an unknown status. 4, at least when I created this slide, 4 have been downlisted, removed from the endangered species list. And unfortunately, 4 that we know of have gone extinct. And so that's what we are trying to keep from happening for the whooping crane. And we are doing that from very specific measurable objectives. And I really want to emphasize the measurable part of that. It's something that is justifiable and it is defensible, that we have measurable criteria. So we go with 2 objectives in our plan to downlist the species to only threatened. So that first one is to establish and maintain a self-sustaining population of whooping cranes. So it has to be genetically stable and it has to be resilient to stochastic environmental events. So hurricanes, man-made disasters, fires, oil spills, something like that. And so that is why that population is geographically, physically separate from that natural population in the Central Flyway. And likewise, the current ongoing reintroduction in coastal Louisiana. The key word in that objective is self-sustaining. So we want to make sure that the population is creating enough wild produced young to allow us to not have to raise them in captivity and supplement the population. That is the ultimate goal. So the second objective is to maintain a genetically stable captive population. So that is quite literally our savings account. So that image that I'm showing there is kind of a representation of one captive center's whooping cranes, and that happens to be the International Crane Foundation. So picture all of the females up here and all of the male cranes down here. And what these numbers are is there's some genetic calculus that I do not understand, but those numbers mean something to those who do understand it. and can calculate it. But you can understand the colors. So green obviously means that these birds can pair with each other. We can exchange genetic material with those individuals, either because they're valuable, they are close to the wild population, like there are not too many generations removed, or they are not already well represented in the wild or in captivity. And so you can see some of these darker colors are getting to be, oh, there we could probably slow down. We don't need it, that genetics represented. And of course, black is right out. They don't want to breed these birds that are have the darkened squares. So it could be because they're too closely related or they're overrepresented. And cranes take very, very well to artificial insemination. We do that a lot here at the Crane Foundation, and we have a very active program to train other facilities and other people worldwide even that want to work on that for other crane populations. So that is why, even though we have crane pairs in captivity, those two individuals may not necessarily be a good genetic match to breed. And so we'll want to continue to kind of mix it up genetically. And each species has a genetic stud book, and the keeper of that stud book happens to be here at the International Crane Foundation as well. So here are all of our populations of whooping cranes currently. And to head to that population downlisting goal, we have these numbers that we are going to aim for. So I'll take you through here. So Aransas wood buffalo population, they are self-sustaining. And I don't have the chart here, but the graph of population growth is starting to get steep, which indicates that every year there are more and more individuals in that population, which is great. And through the end of 2020, which is the most recent numbers that we have across the board for each of these populations, the Aransas wood buffalo population was at 505 and about 91 breeding pairs. So we'll come back to what the significance of that number is in a minute. So we have a captive population. Of course, those are management dependent along the lines of that chart that I just showed. That has been going on for over 50 years. So there was the very first introduction was in the Rocky Mountain population of sandhill cranes. That started in 1975 and it went through 1988. And what they did then was take eggs and put them in the nests of sandhill cranes. We know sandhill cranes do very well. They're great parents. They can teach them the migration route. However, when a baby whooping crane comes out of the egg, the first thing it sees is, of course, a sandhill crane. And since they don't have mirrors, they don't know that they're not a big gray bird also. And so, unfortunately, with that population, there was no natural reproduction because all the whooping cranes that were hatched out paired with sandhills and actually produced a few hybrid species. So that effort was ceased after about 13 years, and no more of those birds exist in the wild currently. Florida was a non-migratory population. Again, that was probably in the historic range of non-migratory whooping cranes. That was begun in 1993 and continued to 2005. There are currently only 9 individuals left in that population. There was much greater than what we would expect naturally adult mortality, and that really affected the production of those birds. Their cranes are long-lived, but slow to reproduce. They don't reach sexual maturity until they're about 3, but they don't get good at parenthood until maybe 5 to 7 years old. So they can, and they only produce 2 eggs typically a year. And so when you take out a breeding adult, it really is a big setback. That reintroduction kind of coincided with the drought cycle in Central Florida, and a lot of human development in Florida, as probably everybody can picture, really made it difficult for that reintroduction to be successful. So what we have been using those birds, some of them have been captured and transferred over to Louisiana and become part of that population. So Louisiana is also management dependent, like the eastern migratory population is. That's the one that we have here in Wisconsin that migrates past Chicagoland to point south. The eastern migratory population was established in 2001, Louisiana in 2011, and both of those are ongoing. And so what we look at here is this criteria. So here's our measurable objectives. If we only have one population, then we're looking at what we want is 1,000 birds in the Aransas wood buffalo population with at least 250 breeding pairs for downlisting. So that indicates that there's no other populations that exist. It has to be that high for downlisting. But if we take it down a notch to about 400 birds in the population and about 100 breeding pair, well, then we have some criteria across the board. So the captive population we want to maintain at that. That's also a criteria. So we do have at least starting to establish 2 more populations that are self-sustaining on their own, and that will help facilitate. So if we do have this criteria met for the Aransas wood buffalo population, so that's good. And we're looking to have, about 80 to 21 breeding pairs currently. That's what this number indicates. But we would want to have it up to about 120 individuals with 30 breeding pair, and in Louisiana, the same number. And if we could reach that across the board, and again, have them be self-sustaining, so that's a lot of young produced naturally every year, those are our criteria for downlisting. So we're a little bit shy of that in both of these populations, and we are nowhere near self-sustaining. And I'll get to that more in a second. But here's our numbers that we can aim for, so at least we have a goal. So just looking at the population here in Wisconsin, this is the eastern migratory population. And we have individuals in this population by release method. So we have put birds out on the landscape in various ways to try to give some variance to behaviors and experiences for these birds when they get out on their own. So each of these colors represents those different methods. So wild hatched in green, and those will be on the top. Parent reared means that they were reared in captivity, but by real whooping cranes, as opposed to these other 2, direct autumn release and ultralight lead, are both young cranes that are raised by people in costume. And it's not so much the costume doesn't make them look quite so much like a crane. It's more to that they don't look like people, so they don't imprint on people. And so in the beginning of the project, you can see that most of these bars are in blue. So a majority of the population, as it grew, was obviously from the ultralight lead costume birds. It doesn't like it when I take too long on these graphs. In 2005 and 6 and ongoing, we started releasing birds by direct autumn release. And so those are also birds raised by people in costume. But the young are released into the company of older birds to learn the migration route. And of course, that's why we started a little bit later, as you can see, because we needed to establish birds that already knew that migration route, that we could release these birds into the company of to learn that migration route. And along the way, 2006, we had our very first wild hatch chick, and there was only one that was fledged in the wild. And you can see that one was the only one for several years. And then as time went on, we added more, and the green bar is getting more and more every year. And the red also. So we are concentrating now here at the Crane Foundation. We only rear birds for release via the parent rearing method. So we have captive birds here on site that are not on our public display for educational purposes. They are purely for raising cranes to release into the wild. So they do not see, at least visitors, they see our crane care staff on a regular basis, but they're defended quite well by those parents. So this black line represents the number of birds that has been released to date. So as of the end of 2020, we have well over 300 birds that have been released. But you can see, unfortunately, this graph, the number of birds that are alive year by year is going down. And our cohort size of releases is smaller. And the number of birds that are wild hatched is not enough. So this is where that self-sustaining comes in. So we have 80 cranes as of February. 17 of those are wild hatched. So as that number grows, and they are so far are still quite young, so they're not nesting yet. And we're hoping that those birds really have the wherewithal at being raised in the wild to be able to become good parents themselves. And of course, last year we had no captive rearing at all due to COVID. So we had to rely entirely on the wild hatched. But these birds are doing really well once we release them. We have really good adult survivability. So that was big after what happened in Florida. They are showing these great pairing behaviors. They're finding natural foods up and down the flyway. Of course, they're forming pairs, territories, and nesting. And maybe not to be taken for granted, they are laying eggs, but most importantly, they are fertile. And that isn't something that's very easy, but we have great fertility in our eggs. And so they aren't hatching chicks. That's great. However, now here's the but we still have low productivity. We have very low year by year birds that look like this. Young of the year, they still have those beautiful cinnamon feathers and blue eyes to follow their parents south on migration. So here's our focus power to increase that productivity. Here's what that looks like graphically. So in the yellow top line, so this is the number of nesting pairs, and we've done great, as this population grows and matures, the number of nesting pairs is increasing. Likewise, the number of chicks hatched per year is going up. But this red line here on the bottom, the number of chicks that we fledge every year is still nowhere near what we would like it to be self-sustaining. And here's a weird thing. I don't know if people remember the spring of 2018, and we had a snowstorm in April, and we lost several whooping crane nests that year due to the snow. But, perhaps more importantly, they did not renest. And cranes also have a propensity for renesting that I'll talk about in a little bit. But they did not renest after that snow. So we had very few nests, but we had the most chicks fledge that we have so far in the program. So who knows? Luck of the draw that year. But that's what we're looking to do, is keep that line going up. So if I could boil my job down into one word, it's why. Why is this happening? And so again, we want to distill this down to something that is measurable. What can we, if we can measure it, then we can maybe try to do some adaptive management or change some protocols to try to fix this. So, the meetings were had, and lots of things were thrown out there, and lots of opinions. But I think it can really be boiled down to those two things. It's got to be the habitat that they're in currently, that either there's something wrong in the habitat or there's not enough right things, or the behavior. Again, a lot of these birds are raised by people. So are we teaching them the wrong things or not the right things? But both of these things maybe can be measured, and we can try to fix it. So if we look at the habitat, and this image here shows what we can at least guess is the historic habitat of the whooping crane. So this is pre-European settlement, from historic records of fur trappers, French missionaries, Native American records. And the core was likely around this red line here, and probably in southwest Minnesota and northern Iowa in the prairie pothole region. And of course, here is wood buffalo way up here. And there are a few records up there, but there was probably few people writing anything down also. So it's hard to know exactly why, if this is truly the extent of the core of that range. But these polygons underneath that, those different colors, represent different ecoregions at this kind of continental scale. So these are, you know, on that scale, different plant and wetland communities, very, very different. And at least what we think of as the core spreads out through quite a few different of these ecoregions. So we can at least have the indication that these birds can nest in varied areas. But here you notice in Wisconsin where we are, we do not have any records of whooping cranes. So this might have been out of their historic range to begin with. So this up here in the top is a picture of Wood Buffalo National Park. That is way up here in Northwest Territories. Gorgeous, empty wetlands, beautiful crane habitat. This is a picture of the prairie pothole region in the Dakotas. And you can see what happened to that. They plowed right up to the edge of that, and many of these wetlands were drained. And so that's what happened to the core of the whooping crane habitat. Likely it was turned into agriculture. And slowly but surely those birds were extirpated. So leave you with the thought that even if there historically were no birds in Wisconsin, what habitat was there at the time that those historic records were being made certainly does not exist in Wisconsin today. But can we make do given that they can use all these other habitats? Food for thought. So, or is it behavior? Well, again, we are raising these birds in costume. Typically we established a population. We could take a lot of birds and teach them the migration route via ultralight flights. That was great. And once that population was established, then we can start to look at raising them one by one with real cranes in captivity. And we can release them into the fall then to learn the migration route from their older brothers and sisters. So that one was a little bit easier to work on, but for somebody who is impatient like me, it's very hard to measure, only because it takes a long time to get there. Again, you know, these birds might not be successful parents for 5 to 7 years. And if you need 5 to 10 years of data to really know if there's a difference between a costume reared bird and a parent reared or wild hatched bird, it's going to be a while before we know. But we forge ahead. We can do a lot of things to modify habitat. So we've done a lot of research looking into the various aspects of that and if that's an issue. So when we looked at the just getting them to sit on nests for a long time was the first problem, getting them to hatch out those eggs. So some of you may have heard about kind of early on in the nesting, 2005 to about 2010, there was a problem with black flies. And if you can imagine, this egg is covered in black flies. Picture the red cap of a crane, which is bare skin covered in black flies. It makes my skin crawl. I probably would get up off of a nest and run into the underbrush as well if I was a crane having to do that. So this one we did experiments with BTI, which is a natural bacterium that affects just the larva of the black fly. So we could target that, but we knew that that really wasn't something that we wanted to manage long term. So I mentioned that cranes have a great propensity to renest. So we thought, well, we can predict when black flies will hatch with pretty good specificity. And it's always kind of early April, right at the time the cranes are nesting. Knowing that, we can go in and collect eggs. We can use those eggs at all of our various captive centers. We can raise them and keep them in captivity for various reasons, or use them for the multiple reintroductions that we have going on currently. The birds will renest after a time. They have to sit on eggs for 30 days. And by that time, the black flies have left the landscape. So if they abandon on their own, there's only a 42% chance that they'll renest. But if we take those eggs and there's a visible disruption to them, they are much more likely to renest, as it turns out. So that is kind of a win-win for us. We get them out of the black fly period, and we have abundant resources of eggs to use for our various reintroductions and raising them in captivity. We also looked into growing season drawdowns and mowing of all the woody vegetation in the marshes at Necedah National Wildlife Refuge. And I hope some of you out there have had the opportunity to go to that refuge. That is where the reintroduction was started. So that's where the core of the breeding birds are. They see that as their natal area, and then they come back and nest there. And you can see here's a drawdown here. So these are beautiful mud flats here, lots of food resources. And by mowing some of that vegetation back, there's clear sight lines so they can see predators that might be around. But there are still nice shallow water bodies that they can roost in the evening. And there's indications that that might contribute to both nest success and the survival of the young. But again, it's really hard to measure with a rare species, and with chicks being few and far between naturally. It's another one that is hard to measure kind of statistically. So, but just the indication that those birds seem to have better productivity is good enough for us to continue on with those management actions. And we also rely on graduate students to do a lot of these. We kind of layer these questions. If we find out one thing, then we kind of keep digging deeper to refine the questions and answers that we get. So I mentioned that the black fly problem was really bad through 2010. And because this black fly problem was such an issue in Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, the Yellow River that is adjacent to that refuge was it seemed like it was the center of the bullseye of black flies in Wisconsin. There was a lot. And we did testing at other sites throughout Wisconsin that might be in the crane range. And it was found that the areas in eastern Wisconsin did not have these densities of black flies. And so the decision was made to move our release sites to both Horicon National Wildlife Refuge and White River Marsh, which was a state area, a state wildlife area. So, well, we wanted to test and see if our guess, quite honestly, our guesses came true. So how are the birds using these newer release areas? How are they using this very different landscape? Much more developed, a lot more communities, highways, agriculture especially. And are they raising young in different wetlands? Much different wetland systems in this part of the state than in Necedah due to our glacial landscape. And so a student out of the University of Oshkosh just finished his master's looking at the use of the landscape. We still have yet to kind of drill down and compare it to how the birds from the Necedah area are using their landscape and see if that makes a difference. And again, the birds in eastern Wisconsin aren't quite, there's not as many breeding birds yet, and certainly not the productivity that we need. So that makes comparisons difficult as well, but we continue to look into that. And likewise, a student at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point just finished her master's looking at the use of Horicon National Wildlife Refuge specifically, and looking at the density and productivity of sandhill cranes there. So she used a lot of nest cameras and kind of following radio tracked birds to see how they were doing at this refuge, to see if we can make a prediction of how to expect the whooping cranes to produce there as well. And the good news is as right as she was finishing up her thesis last year, a very young pair, their very first time nesting at 3 and 4 years old, not only successfully nested and successfully raised a chick, but fledged, flew as a family group to their wintering grounds, and they are now back at Horicon with another chick this year. So fingers crossed. So it's an N of 1. But again, in this reintroduction, we take those bits of joy where we can get them. So we have a new graduate student starting this year with another question. I'll get to that in a little bit, but the research on kind of drilling down into these questions continues. Bottom line, we are making progress. It's slow, but sure. The population is increasing. And again, you can see all of the whooping cranes in the world, considering we had 15 in the world at one point. This is the cause for much rejoicing. But for me, I think for me, the joy also is knowing that regardless of the outcome, We are learning more about how these birds use the landscape. And again, it is nothing like what it was historically. So that we can, even with a rare species, we can coexist on this very, very altered landscape. And we can use this to inform other crane reintroductions worldwide. So joy. And I would encourage you to, if you would like to see where whooping cranes are at any given point in time, we have a real-time searchable, well, it goes back to our database. We rely on all of our data that our staff is getting, eBird sightings, volunteers throughout the wintering range as they monitor the birds for us, all goes into our database. And then we can look and see where birds are. And if you go to whoopermap.savingcranes.org and pick a date and time, especially in migration times, you can kind of see where the population is going. You can see we actually have 2 birds that are over in Michigan. Unfortunately, they're alone. It would be great if a pair went over there and started breeding in Michigan, but so far they are all by themselves, which really, really doesn't help our population at all. But that's a really neat map if you'd like to know where they are in their annual cycle. But our whole team remains committed to a future that is secure for whooping cranes, and ensuring that they're only threatened. And this is Nikki is a ex-intern and is now working on a pilot study for her graduate work that she'll start this fall at the University of Wisconsin, looking at predator densities and how that might affect productivity of these chicks. So we're looking forward to working with her for another couple of years. And again, here's some of our kooky interns that we rely on them. We have such a fantastic group of interns every year, and they do wonderful work for us. So building those conservation professionals to the future. And of course, we have Hope. This is literally Hope. Hope, our whooping crane mascot, and we still do a lot of outreach and education, really informing people that there are whooping cranes now in the Eastern Flyway of the United States, and they're doing good, but we still need people's help to ensure that it stays that way. So I want to quickly turn it over to my friend and colleague, Brittany, who is in Chicagoland, as a matter of fact. She works with us in our Chicago office. She is our Chicago office, and she can describe some opportunities that are upcoming that people can join in on.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know, because we're so close to Baraboo. It's I think it's about a 3-hour drive for me, and I'm in Western Chicago. If you want to organize a group of people to come up, you can reach out to me. My email is there at the bottom. But also in the fall, I usually take a group out to Indiana, to Jasper-Pulaski Fish and Wildlife Reserve, to see the sandhill crane migration. And my colleague and Ann's colleague, who works very closely with her, Hillary Thompson, comes with us, and she will explain the status of the reintroduction on the way to Jasper-Pulaski. It's about, I think, a 2.5-hour drive. And then she also brings that antenna that you see on the top of this vehicle in the picture on the bottom, or she brings a similar antenna, a more portable one.
This one right here, yep.
Yeah, and we go and look for whooping cranes in the area because sometimes they are been spotted around there, and if she knows that they're there, we'll go and drive around and look for those. So you may be able to see one of the big white birds. So if you're interested in getting information about that when I organize that tour, you can just shoot me an email. And if you have any other questions, email me.
Thank you, Brittany. Yeah,
thank you.
It's good to go on that tour with people in the know. If there's a whooping crane around, Hillary knows where it is, and she can drive right.
Oh yes.
Wink, wink.
She can tell you all about their origins, whether or not they like long walks on the beach. That's she's got their full bios with her.
Excellent. So yeah, it's been a while since I've been to Jasper-Pulaski, but bringing it back around to Sandhills. Thank you. Awesome. So here we go. This picture, wouldn't it be lovely that this is just a day in the life of Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, where there's family groups, there's pairs unison calling and defending their territory, and there's young birds, and this is what we strive for, and this is what we're working towards. Thank you all for your support of us. It would be great if you wanted to become a member of the International Crane Foundation. This is the kind of thing that you would support, plus work all over the world that you can find out more about on our website. But if you have questions about this or anything else crane related, I would love to answer those.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anne. And I've certainly learned a whole lot about the whooping cranes tonight. And we do have a couple of questions for you.
I'm just going to leave this slide up for a little bit because it's so pretty.
What are the two birds on the map in Illinois?
Is that so? This one? So I realize I usually do a screenshot of this real time. Mm-hmm. So if this was a real-time shot, most of the birds would be up here in Wisconsin. We do it to the county level, and then these two over here. I am trying to remember where this is. What those two indicate is at this time, I think this was obviously during migration, late winter, that there's often a stopover site in those two areas. So that's what that indicated, but that's not real time, unfortunately. They have moved on. They were young birds, so they did wait quite a while before they just kind of meandered back to their natal area up here in Wisconsin. But is
that the pair that lands near Nachusa?
It might be. No, that was a family group. This is a different one. Yeah. There was a family group. Somebody hit the jackpot and just happened to be birding in Nachusa this spring and spied a family group on their way back north. So I can't imagine how. I hope he was excited. He had great pictures. So yeah, that was a pair with a chick that was coming back.
Incredible. Mm-hmm. And the next question is from Sarah. What kind of monitoring goes on in Florida?
So Florida whooping cranes, just that non-migratory population, is taken care of via the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. That's basically their state DNR. And my friend Tim Dellinger he has a couple of technicians that he works with, but he is it. He is the crane guy of Florida. And so we did work with him, and we thought, if the birds are not, there's so few of them, and there was quite a few single females, and we thought, I think it's best if we attempt to bring them over into Louisiana, and where there's a lot more birds that they can choose from and pair with. And so we worked with our friends at Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, who are leading the reintroduction there. And so I spent a glorious week in Orlando, Florida, in environs with Tim and a bunch of our staff, attempting to capture some whooping cranes. And we caught two birds, and we caught them up and took them to another one of our captive facilities that was close by. And they went through their health check and quarantine and went to Florida. That was 2 years ago. They did pair, and both of them are nesting this year. So that's the goal, is to make them productive members of their species, and that happened. So it just was in Louisiana instead of Florida.
Well, we have a question from Brittany. Anne, can you update us on nesting and the number of hatched chicks this season, if you have those numbers?
Yep. Nesting up here in Wisconsin is officially done. And I forget, I believe we had 21 nests total. Some of those were re-nests, so that's not the total number of pairs, but we do aerial surveillance because that's the easiest way to determine if there's chicks there, especially now that the wetlands have grown up. It is thick and very difficult to find a baby chick that's this big in wetland vegetation when they know that you're looking for them. So our aerial surveillance just yesterday, we counted 9. So we're up to 9 wild hatch chicks, including a pair that still has 2. And so I don't want to jinx it, but we've never had a pair of whooping cranes that has fledged siblings. So it is, and it's very rare. even for sandhills. So yes, everybody crossed fingers that would be superb. Yep. And we have four chicks here at the Crane Foundation that are currently being parent reared that we will release into the fall if they make it through healthy and strong. So also fingers crossed.
Yes, want them to keep going forward, keep growing.
Yeah, it's not easy keeping them alive in the wild and healthy in captivity. So that's what we strive for.
Absolutely. Our next question is from Louise. How visible are the nesting whooping cranes at HorrorCon? Is it possible to go there and likely see them later in the summer?
Well, I can't say that because then you'll go there and not see them and I'll feel badly. But we get reports quite often from people that have seen the birds at HorrorCon. So I tentatively say, yes, absolutely go, because it's a lovely refuge. It is stunning for all of the other bird life that is there, as a matter of fact. So there are quite a few, meaning 4 whooping cranes that kind of hang out around the visitor center. And the family group they have nested, and their chick is now in one of the impoundments that is not open to the public. There's no walking paths by. But if you do the auto tour loop, if any of you have been there and that sounds familiar, you might see it from there, but otherwise it might be fall before the family group is visible again. But do go. It's absolutely a phenomenal refuge. It's absolutely great. And keep going until you see those whooping cranes. And then come by the Crane Foundation. I could keep going.
Well, we got a couple of more questions. Can you explain a bit about the ultralights and migration? And this question's from Pam.
Sure. I'm not quite sure exactly. I mean, I'll tell you my version of it. So really the reason that this population can exist is because we were able to take a lot of birds and raise them. The costume rearing technique was proven. We knew that was a way to raise cranes and not have them imprint on people. So they knew that they were whooping cranes and they would pair with each other. But how to get them on a migration path, how to teach them that. And so it was just a brilliant innovation in reintroduction science, which is a thing. And so that went on for 15 years. There were that many cohorts of birds that were raised and guided via ultralight, and it was difficult, dangerous. There was a couple of incidents, but I mean, by and large, it was safe, but there's always that risk. It took a long time, which means the time and the resources were extreme, especially for the staff of Operation Migration. But to say they were passionate about this is an understatement. So, for 15 years, we worked to build up the population. And meanwhile, we were working to use these other techniques to back that up, knowing that eventually the time would come that we do not want to use the ultralight anymore. We want to focus on building a better bird. By using the parent reared technique, we knew that there were real whooping cranes that were raising these birds. And I've never done the costume rearing. Our people do great, but they're people. They're not real cranes, and you just never know what you miss. And so once that population got built up enough, and we had a lot of established pairs going back and forth and knowing that migration route, knowing the safe stopovers and what to do and what not to do, we knew that we really wanted to focus on the parent rearing. And so that's where we've been since 2016. That's the short story.
That's interesting. And that kind of couples with the last question I have. what was your assessment of the effect of discontinuing the ultralight program? And I think it was what you said, you guys wanted to focus more on parent rearing.
Yeah. And, you know, we're really focusing more on field research now that we have kind of a bulk of birds that are nesting out there, is to really look and see, you know, what is going on in the, you know, the wilds of Wisconsin, all the various wetlands that they're using, and the agriculture, and, you know, any subtleties to that we can look into and see if that is affecting their productivity. Because again, these birds are fertile, they're laying great eggs in these beautiful wetlands, but why aren't they fledging them? So, you know, really focusing on that and putting fewer birds out there, but trying to ensure that the wild birds are hatching and fledging chicks is really where our focus lies now.
Well, thank you so much, Anne, for answering those questions, and thank you so much for your presentation.
My pleasure. Yeah,
Please
let us know anytime if you have any questions. Happy to. And come up and see us. If I'm here, I'll answer your questions in person.
Love to. I know I'm coming.
Yes.
And we've come to about the end of our program. And just before we log off for the night, just wanted to give a few announcements. We've got quite a few in-person events for the month of June. The first of the few are June 9th, 10th, and the 13th. These are work days at the Ticheney Basin in Northbrook, Illinois. Each workday has different hours, so please RSVP by sending an email to cas@chicagoaudubon.org. Also on June 9th is a bird walk at Whistler Woods in Riverdale from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. We also are celebrating Pride Month, June 12th, out in nature meetup at Hosa Prairie in Illinois Beach State Park. Please RSVP. And there's also another bird walk on the 12th with Deja Perkins at Jackson Park. Please continue to RSVP for all these dates. And June 13th is a bilingual walk at Ronan Park. It is in Spanish from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And June 16th will be at Kickapoo Woods. And June 19th will be at Whistler Woods. And we also have a Whistler Woods walk on June 23rd. And we'll be in Kickapoo on June 26th. And Deja Perkins also has another walk on June 22nd at Big Marsh. And we also have, finally, this fall, Birds and Coffee to Jarvis. And that's from Red Hill Birding. And that will be every Friday from August 27th through October. And so you can please go to chicagoaudubon.org for our events. Go to our Facebook page, and you can see more about all our work that we're doing all across the city of Chicago and Chicagoland. And again, I want to say thank you to the International Crane Foundation. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank
you, Bobby. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Antonio. And I'm Jennifer, your program chair. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.